This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niratayame. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Munie Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Munie Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Munie Soha. Thank you so much, Venerable Sangye Khadro, for being here.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. So I thought to start this evening's session with a meditation on something we looked at last week, just at the end of the class. So we've been going through the practice of close placement of mindfulness on the body, and there are different ways of practicing that. So one of the ways is to meditate on the elements and how our body is made up of these 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and wind. And that can be very helpful to get a sense of impermanence. Our body's changing all the time, and it's not so solid as it normally seems. And also get a sense of selflessness, absence of self. So I thought to start tonight with a meditation on that, on the elements, and just to get a sense of how helpful that could be. So let's begin with some sitting quietly, getting ourselves into a good space, good state for doing meditation. So if you can, sit up straight with your back straight. But it's still important to be comfortable and as relaxed as possible. So if there is any tension anywhere in your body, see if you can let it go. You can imagine it melting and then flowing out of your body and sinking into the earth, disappearing there. And if there's any thoughts in your mind that aren't related to what we're doing here during this class, put those aside. If you're still thinking about things that happened during the day or just before this class started, or if you're thinking about the future, tonight, tomorrow, the weekend, and so on, put those thoughts aside. You can always pick them up again later, but really do the best you can to keep your mind right here on what we are doing in the present moment. And for a few minutes, be aware of the breath coming in and going out, the mindfulness of the breathing. So that helps the mind to calm down and be more centered, more present. So do that for a few minutes, and then we'll go into the meditation on the elements. So the first of the four elements is the earth element. To get a sense of that, press your teeth together, not too hard so that it hurts, but just hard enough so that you get a sense of hardness. So that hardness is a manifestation of the earth element, which is hardness, solidity. Then go down through your body, scan your body from the top of your head, going down, and contemplate other parts of the body where there's hardness, mainly the bones. So we have bones all through our body, starting from the skull, and then going down through the neck, the back, and so on. But some other parts of the body are also fairly hard. So just see if you can get a sense of the hardness, solidity in the various parts of your body. Then next is the water element. So to get a sense of that, become aware of saliva in your mouth. Allow the saliva to gather and then swallow it. Get a sense of that liquidness, which is the manifestation of the water element. And again, go down through your body from the top of your head down and see if you can get a sense of the water element in other parts of the body, such as the blood, bile, various more liquidy parts of the body. But that also includes the cells. All the cells in our body contain a lot of liquid. Next is the fire element, which is heat and warmth. So see if you can find some place in your body that feels warm right now. Just focus on that place and get a sense of the heat or warmth or fire element. But that too exists all throughout the body. Again, scan your body, go down through your body, and contemplate how the fire element plays an important role in the bodily functions, especially digestion of food. We need a lot of warmth there to be able to digest the food, to make use of it, to nourish different parts of our body. And then the fourth is the air or wind element. And we can notice that most easily with our breathing. So our breath is continuously coming in and going out. But in addition to the breathing, the air element also exists throughout the body. It enables movement to take place. So even the movement of bodily fluids like blood. And whenever we move our body, arms, legs, hands, fingers, eyes, mouth, so it's the air element that enables movement to take place. And this is true also in the very subtle levels of the body, like cells, molecules, atoms. Those are also moving around. There's movement taking place all the time in our body. And this is the function of the air element. So these four elements are like properties existing all throughout our body, playing important roles in bodily functions, keeping us alive. But they are all impermanent. They're not fixed, frozen, static things. Rather, they are changing all the time. Every nanosecond, these four elements are changing, not staying the same from one moment to the next. Also, all these elements are not I, me, myself, who I am, what I am. They're just physical properties. And one day we will die, our body will die, and the elements of our body will dissipate and merge with the external four elements that exist outside of ourselves: earth, water, fire, and air. So we can't think of these elements of our body as me or as mine in some kind of permanent way. Who I am, how I will be for all of time. And even now, while we're alive, constantly there's coming and going movement of the elements from inside our body to the outside, like when we breathe in and out, when we perspire, when bits of dead skin fall off and collect on the furniture and so on. So parts of our body, parts of our elements are leaving our body all the time. And we are also taking in elements from the outside. Again, when we breathe, we're breathing in new elements. When we eat and drink, we're taking in new elements that get incorporated into our body. So there's this constant exchange of internal elements and external elements. So if that is the case, then does it make sense to think of our body as I, as me, as who I am? In the Satipatthana Sutra, that's the sutra in which the Buddha taught this practice of the close placements of mindfulness. So when talking about how the body is made of these 4 elements, the Buddha gave an analogy. It's kind of a gruesome analogy, but it's one that I think his followers could relate to, and I think we can relate to it as well. So the analogy was of an animal being butchered and cut into pieces. So like even now in India, if you go to India, especially out in the rural areas, you often see butchers just kind of right out in the open along the side of the road. And you can actually observe them killing animals and cutting them into pieces and so on. And it certainly happens here, although not so much out in the open where people can see it. So anyway, before the animal is butchered, then it appears like a cow or a sheep or a pig or whatever. But then after the butcher has, killed it and then cut it into pieces of meat, and then people buy those pieces of meat and they take them home and they cook them. And then the notion of a cow or of a sheep or a pig is gone, right? Even in our language, when we're having a hamburger, we don't say, I'm eating a cow, right? So we have even a different name for that thing that we're eating. So it's similar when we do a meditation, either this meditation on the elements, how our body is made up of these different elements, or the meditation on the parts of the body, the 32 parts of the body. So in a way, we're mentally dismantling, dissecting the body into its components. And doing that can reduce this strong sense of a solid I, instead of thinking there's this me somehow in this body, or this body is me. So when we break it down into components, that notion of a solid I kind of vanishes, doesn't make sense anymore. And so that's very helpful for decreasing, that sense of a strong, solid I or person or me. And last week, the last slide that we looked at, there was this quotation from Nagarjuna, his text called The Precious Garland, I think, where he said, and this is quite a famous verse, it's used in many texts, especially about emptiness. He said, a person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space. For example, there's space within our body, not consciousness. So that's something other than our body, but it's still part of us. So a person is none of those things, and also not all of them together. So even the whole combination of those things is not a person either. So what person is there other than these? So the point about all those parts together, that's a little tricky. It's a little easier, I think, to see that, okay, yeah, my little finger isn't me, and my ear isn't me, and my nose isn't me, and so on, looking at the individual components, we can get a sense, yeah, that's not me. But then we tend to feel, but when you put all those things together, the whole combination, the whole package, that's a person, that's me, or that's somebody else. That's a little harder to dispel, that kind of idea. But what is said is that if we go through all the components, all the parts of the body and all the different parts of the mind, and we get the sense that none of those individual parts is me, okay? None of the individual parts is me. I can't find me in any of those individual parts. So in that way, all those parts are not me. each and every part of me is not me. Okay. So then how can we say that if you put together all those things that are not me, then it becomes me. It becomes a person. Yeah. So think about that. Yeah. You take a whole bunch of not me's, not persons, and you put them all together. How can that become a person, a me? Where is the me? You're still, there's still the question of, all those parts aren't me's, but somehow all together they're me. But where is that me? If you can't find it among all the individual parts, how can you find it when all those parts are together? So this is a puzzle. This is like a koan to think about, to contemplate. See if you can come up with an answer to that. And also, it's helpful to try to notice the different thoughts and feelings and concepts that we have with regard to our body. For example, when we look in the mirror, we see our reflection of ourself in the mirror, or just looking at our body, different parts of our body. What kind of thoughts do we have? What kind of feelings do we have? And check to see if they're realistic or not. Do we have realistic notions? Also, when if it happens that people make comments about our body, sometimes they may make compliments. Yeah, they may say something pleasing, complimentary, praising us with regard to our body, or the opposite. They may say things that are kind of disparaging, hurtful. And so it's good to check what comes up in our mind. Once when I was staying in San Francisco, many, many years ago, and I was teaching at Tse Chen Ling, and I went one day to the supermarket. I think it's called Rainbow. Is it? This big, beautiful, natural food store, Rainbow. Yeah. To get some groceries. And at the checkout stand, the cashier, after he finished checking out my all my items, he asked if I qualify for a senior discount. And I was a little shocked. I think at that time I must have been still in my 50s. So I asked, how what's the age to get a senior discount? And I can't remember what it was, 60 or 65. But that's what he said. And so kind of like my sense of ego, my sense of self just took a dive. Okay, I look that old. And so I said to him, no, I'm not that old. And I think he kind of blushed and, said, well, you just never know. So that was a real interesting experience. Because I think universally, we want to look young. We want to be young. We don't want to look old, especially, people think we're older than we really are. It's not very pleasant to hear. But this is all, related to our sense of I being so much tied up with our physical body. Is that right? Am I this body? I like that saying, you're, what is it? Something about you're only as old as you feel, or you're as young as you feel, something like that. So I checked my mind, and I kind of feel like I'm still 20, My body says otherwise, but mentally, yeah, I kind of still feel like a young person, which is fine. But we also do have to be realistic, and if our body's getting older, we need to take care of it in a different way than when we're 20. So anyway, that's just one example, but just to check what kind of thoughts we have with regard to our bodies. And so this practice of mindfulness of the body is helpful to help, to be able to recognize unhelpful or unrealistic attitudes that we may have with regard to bodies, our own bodies and other bodies. Because, when it comes to other people, we probably judge them in relation to their bodies and don't always have equanimity towards others due to their physical appearance and so on. So lots of problems can come as a result of over-identification with regard to the body. And I have a commentary on the 4 establishments of mindfulness from Geshe Rabten. He was one of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teachers. He lived in Switzerland for a long time. So he gave a commentary to this practice. And in that commentary, I was just reading it today, he said, the principal function of close placement of mindfulness is to eliminate disturbing conceptions. Right? So we do have within our mind conceptions that are unhelpful and lead to suffering, lead to problems. So, we need to recognize those and gradually overcome them. But it can be difficult to do this kind of work when we're mostly with people who have the same disturbing conceptions that we do. It's like everybody identifies with their body and judges themselves and others based on bodily appearance and so on. So it's kind of hard to step back from that when you're around people like that. And also with regard to the media, most advertisements and TV programs and movies and things on the internet and so on are also like reinforcing these disturbing conceptions. And so it's, this is a good reason why it's helpful to spend more time with Buddhist teachers and with Buddhist practitioners, who are trying to work on changing these attitudes. And then that can help us to do the same. Okay, so Effie, if you could put up the slides. Okay, so we are still on the close placement of mindfulness of the body, and that includes these 6 different practices. And these were taught by the Buddha in the Satipatthana Sutra. He explained each of these 6 practices. And they're mainly used in the Pali tradition, the Theravada tradition. And so we've gone through most of these, I've explained them and we did a little bit of practice on them, except for the last one, number 6. So let's just take a look at that one. We won't meditate on that one, don't worry. Corpses. So the next slide has some information about that. So, some people, when they first hear about meditating on corpses, they might, feel shocked and maybe wonder if Buddhism is really a reasonable tradition. So in the book, Following in the Buddha's Footsteps, where this practice is explained quite well, in that book it says, it is important to understand the purpose of this meditation well and to do it with a balanced mind so that our mind does not proliferate with superstitious or fearful thoughts. Before doing this meditation, it is advisable to have some experience in meditation and to have heard teachings on the 4 truths. So it's not something that is taught to beginners, brand new people, but, people who have some knowledge of Buddhism, especially the Four Noble Truths, and some experience with meditation, because it can stir up some kind of difficult emotions. And the book goes on to say, although many modern societies try to hide death away, and some people see death as a punishment, an indication of failure or evil in nature, so some people have those kind of concepts about death. It's something really bad, horrible, evil. It is merely a natural occurrence that results from the physical processes of organic matter. Okay, so it's just a natural thing that happens. In ancient times, death was not hidden in hospitals, old age homes, and beautifully gardened cemeteries as it is today. Corpses were thrown in charnel grounds where they were left to decompose or to be eaten by animals. That's how it was in India. They had these open areas where corpses were put out. I don't know if that was true for everyone. I think some bodies were cremated, but maybe people who didn't have money or whatever, their bodies would just be left out in this open area. And the Buddha encouraged his disciples to go to charnel grounds to observe corpses in various stages of decomposition. This challenges the distorted view of the body as being attractive and the source of pleasure, and strengthens renunciation of samsara. Okay, so one purpose for doing that kind of practice on corpses is to really bring home the truth of impermanence and death, that inevitably each and every one of us will die, and this body, right, that's now alive will become dead, a corpse. And we probably don't like thinking about that. But then why do we feel that way? Why do we recoil from that thought? And is it helpful? Is it helpful to have this kind of resistance and fear to think about our body becoming a corpse? It's definitely going to happen one day. So doesn't it make more sense to gradually get familiar with that reality and get used to it, come to accept it, rather than live in fear and anxiety about it? And it's also helpful to check how we do feel about corpses. I remember the first couple of times that I saw corpses, I was already an adult in my 20s. And I felt a lot of fear. But then over time, with more familiarity, having more opportunities to be in the presence of corpses. For example, when I lived in Singapore, I was sometimes asked to go and do prayers for someone who had died or who was dying. And so I did have some more experience being around corpses. And that really helped to become more accepting and not so frightened. But I also realized that it doesn't make sense to be afraid of corpses, dead bodies. I mean, unless they're infected with something like Ebola, then they can be harmful to us. But otherwise, how can a corpse harm us? What can a corpse do to harm us? Right? It makes more sense to be afraid of live bodies, because a live body could do something harmful to us, but a dead body can't harm us. So it's kind of irrational, to be afraid of a corpse. But I think the fear is really fear of death. The corpse is reminding us that, that's going to happen to us one day, and we don't really want to think about that. We don't want to face that. And so it's kind of throwing that in our face. You're going to be like this too one day. No, I don't want to think like that. So that's the real fear. The fear is of our own death. But again, the Buddha said it's very important for us to contemplate death and impermanence, and even every day. Think about that. It's going to happen, and it's much better to think about it and prepare for it rather than always avoiding it, not wanting to think about it, because then we won't be prepared when it does happen. So you're probably familiar with in the Lam Rim, this meditation on the 9 points. It's called the 9-point or 9-round meditation on death. Very, very helpful. Very, very powerful. Okay, so anyway, so the first bullet point says, the Buddha recommends contemplating a corpse in 9 different stages of decomposition. Starting from being bloated and bluish just a few days after death, to being a pile of bones and then crumbled to dust. So in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha talks about these different stages that happen over time to a body, to a corpse. And yeah, the advice is to meditate on these with regard to yourself. This is what's going to happen to my body. And eventually, even the bones will crumble and there'll just be dust left over. And then, yes, at each stage, one should compare one's own body with that corpse, thinking, this body too is of the same nature. It will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. So nowadays it's not so easy. I think most people wouldn't have the opportunity to actually observe a body decomposing. Although I heard of this place in Texas associated with a university, and it's related to forensics. The people in this university are studying forensics, and so they have this kind of big field outdoor, and people will offer their bodies, I don't know if that's the right word, offer, bequeath. Anyway, they'll say, you can have my body when I die, okay? So people offer their bodies to this facility, and then the bodies are just put out in the open. And I think they put some sort of like a fence around it so that animals don't come and eat them. But then, the people in this facility are studying just what happens to a body in the various stages of decomposition. So they probably don't allow other people to come in. But anyway, there are people who are doing that kind of work. And so they have a very good opportunity to observe what happens to a body. So otherwise, for us, we just have to use our imagination. We have to kind of try to imagine what happens to a body. And so, like I said, we're not going to go through this here. It is those who are interested, who want to know more. It is explained in the Satipatthana Sutra, which you can find online. There's lots of sutras, translations of sutras online. You just Google the name. And also that book that I've been reading from, Following in the Buddha's Footsteps, that also has more details about like these 9 stages and how you meditate on them. And there's also meditations on skeletons. And I thought maybe after our break, we'll have our usual mid-time break, and then after the break we could do one of these meditations. This might not be so difficult, so gruesome, but it's still quite helpful. And these skeleton meditations are taught in Vasubandhu's text, the Abhisamayalankara, Treasury of Manifest Knowledge. This is one of the texts that are studied in the monasteries, the Geshe studies. And so he teaches these meditations, and they're to help us overcome attachment. For those who have strong attachment, it helps overcome attachment. But I've also heard that in some traditions, like in the Theravada tradition, Some meditators will use a skeleton, visualization of a skeleton, as their object for developing calm abiding, concentration. And so while developing calm abiding on the skeleton, they're also overcoming attachment, decreasing their attachment. And I've heard, you can get very blissful. We tend to think of skeleton as something ugly, scary, but if you're using it as an object to develop calm abiding, and then you do develop calm abiding, then it's very blissful. That itself brings bliss in the body and mind. So it just kind of shows that the object doesn't have to be something unpleasant or scary or bring up difficult emotions. Okay, so that's, then we've kind of gone briefly through the 6 practices related to the body, close placement of mindfulness on the body. And though, as I say, those 6 are explained by the Buddha in the Satipatthana Sutra, and they're practiced mainly in the Theravada tradition. So now I'd like to switch to the Mahayana tradition. So the next slide presents that. So up at the top, the CPM stands for close placement of mindfulness. So the 4 close placements of mindfulness in the Mahayana, the tradition, this involves meditation on the characteristics of the 4 objects. So again, the 4 objects are body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. So far, we've only been looking at the first one, the body. And so this explanation can be found in commentaries to the Ornament for Clear Realization. So I did share with you some files, and one of the files is an extract from a text by Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen. Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen is the textbook author for Sangye Monastery. So most of our teachers are from Sangye Monastery. So they use the texts of Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen. And so, you have an extract of a text by him that contains explanation not only of the 4 close placements of mindfulness, but I think all of the 37 harmonies. And the name of that file, it has the word Roltso, R-O-L-T-S-O. That's the Tibetan name of his text. It means something like ocean of sport. Anyway, so on page 7 of that file that you should have a copy of, Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen talks about how to cultivate the 4 close placements of mindfulness. And he says the way to do it is to examine the specific and general characteristics of each of these 4 objects: body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. So general characteristics means these characteristics that apply to all 4 of the objects: body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. And then specific characteristics, each of the 4 objects has a specific characteristic that you contemplate. So in the chart here, in the slide here, the general characteristics that apply to all 4 objects are impermanence, suffering, empty, and selfless. Okay, so we meditate on those 4 characteristics for each of the 4 objects. And then for the specific characteristics of each object are, first of all, for the body, the impurity of the body, and then the suffering nature of feelings, the impermanence of the mind, and the selflessness of phenomena. And in Jetsun Chokyi Gyaltsen's text, he doesn't really explain how to meditate on these characteristics. But like I said, I have this commentary given by Geshe Rabten, and so that does contain some more advice, some more instructions on how to meditate. So what Geshe Rabten says is, again, I quoted this before, the principal function of close placement of mindfulness is to eliminate disturbing conceptions. And there are two stages to the process of eliminating disturbing conceptions. The first stage is to subdue the manifest disturbing conceptions. So that means, manifest means they're running around in our mind. They're actively part of our mind and our thoughts and our experiences. So those are the manifests. So we need to subdue those. So for example, super strong attachment that may arise when you see another body, a really attractive, good-looking body, and your mind just goes bonkers, crazy with attachment. So that's an example of a manifest disturbing conception, and that needs to be subdued. We need to be able to bring that down so our mind isn't just totally crazy. So that's the first stage, is to subdue the manifest disturbing conceptions. Then the second stage is to completely eliminate all disturbing conceptions, to just wipe them out so they're not there anymore. That's harder to do, of course. And so we start with the first stage. And so what Geshe Rabten says is to subdue the manifest disturbing conceptions, then we first meditate on the specific characteristics. So I've kind of put them in the opposite order, but according to Geshe Rabten, the specific characteristics should be meditated on first, and then afterwards the general characteristics. So by meditating on the specific characteristics of each object, that's how we subdue these manifest disturbing conceptions. And then after that, we meditate on the general characteristics to eliminate those disturbing conceptions from the root. So with regard to, we're still on the body, we haven't moved on yet to the next object of feelings, but with regard to the body, the specific characteristic of the body is the impurity of the body. And in Geshe Rabten's commentary, he says that to do that meditation, then you meditate on the body as a corpse and how it decomposes over time. So that's, according to his commentary, and I guess according to the Mahayana tradition, that's the meditation you would do to get a sense of the body being impure, how it decomposes over time. But as we saw, that's not so suitable for everybody, especially in the beginning. You need to be kind of more experienced in meditation and have a better understanding of the Dharma. And so I think that the Theravada tradition, where they meditate on the 32 parts of the body and also the elements, so doing those meditations, I think, would also have the effect of helping us get a sense of the body being something impure, or not pure. So when we go through the parts of the body, like skin, blood, and organs, and so forth, and if we ask ourselves with regard to each of those parts, is this something pure? Is this something clean? Then it's hard to find anything that's really clean and pure. And if you have difficulty accepting that, if you resist that idea of the body being impure, then just think about what would happen if body parts were to get spilled onto something like a piece of cloth or a surface of a table, would we feel delighted, or would we feel, ooh, I have to clean this up, I have to wash this off? So I think generally what we do is we would say, we have to clean it, we have to wash it, it's dirty, right? It's been contaminated by some part of the body. So this is what, the conception that we have. So there's often, if we really check carefully, we tend to have contradictory ideas, contradictory attitudes. Like, for example, just say with hair. Okay, if you see somebody with a beautiful head of hair and it's been washed and styled and it just looks, beautiful, clean, shiny, and so on, we would think, oh, that's so beautiful. Your hair is so beautiful. Yeah. But then in other situations, like for example, if we find a piece of hair in our food, right? If you go to a restaurant and there's a piece of hair in your food, what do? Do we say, oh, it's so beautiful? We probably get upset, and people get really upset. They call the waiter over and they say, take this food away. It's got hair in it. It's disgusting. I mean, it's true, the hair could be dirty and infected and not healthy to eat. But, if hair is something beautiful and wonderful and pure and clean and so on, it should be like that all the time, in every case, in every situation. But we're just checking our own attitudes. We can see that no, we don't feel that way. Or if you're sharing a shower, bathroom shower with other people, and you go into the bathroom and you find there's hair in the sink, or hair on the floor, or hair in the drain of the shower, you also probably don't think, oh, how lovely, how wonderful, it's so beautiful. Probably feel kind of disgusted. So that's just one example, yeah. But we need to do this to challenge our own thoughts and our own attitudes, yeah. And if we do think the body is something wonderful and pure, then check again, when it comes to parts of the body, and if we happen to see them somewhere they're not supposed to be, like on our dinner plate or on our table. How do we feel? Yeah. How do we feel about that? Okay, so it's about time for a break. So I'm just presenting this now. This is, in general, how the 4 close placements of mindfulness are explained and meditated on in the Mahayana tradition. And so after the break, well, we'll do that meditation on the skeleton that I said we do. It's kind of cute, kind of fun. And then go on and look at how we can meditate on the general characteristics of the body. So that's also something we can learn a lot from. Okay, so let's have a break here, and then we'll come back after 5 minutes. Okay, so let's do this meditation on the skeleton from Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha. And this is one meditation that's used in the Tibetan tradition. It was mentioned by Geshe Rabten in his commentary. So make yourselves comfortable. Let your body relax. Let your mind relax. Put aside other thoughts. Decide to keep your mind focused to the best of your ability on what we're going to do. So put your attention in the center of your forehead and imagine that there's a hole there that goes all the way down to the bone, to your skull. And the hole is just about the size of the tip of your thumb. And there's no flesh in this hole. And now imagine that this hole starts to expand, gets bigger. With the flesh of your head disappearing as this hole gets bigger. And gradually this hole, without any flesh, covers the whole top of your head, whole skull, exposing the bone. And imagine that everything inside of your skull also falls away, vanishes, leaving just the bone. There's just your skull left. And imagine the area that's without any flesh expanding even more until the whole of your head is exposed, free of flesh, and there's just the skull, just the bone. And then it continues downwards through your neck, your back, your chest. All the fleshy parts of the body are disappearing, vanishing, leaving just the bones. Let this continue to happen, going all the way down through your body, the torso, your arms, hands, your legs, all the way down to your feet. So eventually, all that's remaining is bones, your skeleton. Now, imagine that your skeleton grows, expands, gets bigger, becomes as big as the room that you're in. Then gets as big as the house or building you're living in. And then it gets as big as the city you live in. And all the other things disappear. There's only this skeleton, and all other objects like houses, buildings, roads, cars, and so on, they all vanish. And your skeleton keeps growing, and eventually it's as big as the whole country. And eventually big as the whole planet, the whole earth. The earth disappears and there's just this huge skeleton. And it keeps growing until it fills the whole universe. It's as big as the universe. And that's all there is this huge, enormous skeleton. And just for a few moments, keep your mind focused on that. Concentrate on that experience of this enormous skeleton filling the whole of space, the whole universe. Then imagine this huge skeleton shrinking once again, becoming smaller until eventually it's back to its normal size. And then resume your usual awareness of your environment, the things around you, and your body as it normally appears, with all the flesh, all the parts of the body. So the conclusion for the meditation is to think that our own body and the bodies of others are normally dressed up in clothes and other sort of decorations like jewelry, but these bodies are just a bunch of bones, skeletons covered with flesh, organs, and so on. So there's nothing here in the body to be attached to cling to as something attractive, a source of pleasure, or identifying as I or me. See if you can generate a strong sense of renunciation to become free of taking bodies like this again and again in samsara. Free yourself from this situation, which is nothing but unpleasant, painful, unsatisfactory. Before I continue, does anyone have a question related to things I've talked about so far that you'd like to ask?
You can raise your hand or you can send it to me in the chat if you want. We have one hand, Louise.
There's a hand.
Hi. This may sound like a silly question, probably is, but I've always had problems imagining when your body, well, when the skeleton or however you're imagining yourself fills space, becomes immense, while everything else is dissolved around you. How do you know you've reached the limits of space if everything else is dissolved around you? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, we're just doing this in our imagination. And I have to admit, I'm not very good at visualizing. So I just sort of tell myself, this is what's happening. You know, there's this huge skeleton filling all of space, and I just try not to think about anything else. Yeah. Everything else is gone, only this huge, huge skeleton. I don't know if that's really the right way of doing it. I suppose someone with really good, strong powers of meditation and visualization would be able to have a
Oh,
better
that's not,
experience than that. But, you know, that's you know, the extent to which I can do it. Because I
that's
think,
not me, but that's kind of how I do it. Thank you so much.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see. There may be time at the end for other questions that might come up. Okay, so let's go on. The next slide. Okay, so let's look at how the close placement of mindfulness can help us with overcoming these four misconceptions. So in Buddhist texts, philosophical texts, it's explained that ordinary sentient beings like us have these four misconceptions with regard to true dukkha. So true dukkha, this is the first of the Four Noble Truths. It's usually translated as true suffering or the truth of suffering, but some people prefer to use the word dukkha. That's the Sanskrit and Pali term. It means anything that's kind of unsatisfactory, unpleasant, imperfect. And so it sort of has a vaster connotation than the word suffering, which we use only for kind of really extreme, horrible experiences, whereas dukkha is vaster, it's broader than that. It includes any experience that's not really ideal, perfect, satisfying, and so on. So anyway, the first noble truth is called true dukkha, or true suffering. And the first noble truth doesn't only refer to experiences like pain and sadness and so on, but it refers to things. For example, our body. Anything that comes into existence from karma and delusions, karma and afflictions, is true dukkha. Okay, so true dukkha includes our bodies and also our minds, as long as they're afflicted by karma and delusions, and also the things in the world around us, the clothes that we wear, the food that we eat, the places we live in, our possessions, cars, money. All of these things are actually true dukkha, because they come into existence due to karma and afflictions. They don't have pure, perfect causes that give rise to them, but instead it's imperfect, impure causes that give rise to them. So anyway, true dukkha is really quite vast. There's lots of things included in it. And the Buddha said that ordinary beings have these misconceptions about true dukkha. And we'll just use our own body as an example to illustrate these. I'm talking a lot about the body because it's easier to work with. Yeah, it's something physical, something visible, something we can see and touch. And the other objects that we practice the close placement of mindfulness on are more subtle. For example, feelings, right? We can't see feelings, we can feel feelings, but they're not physical things we can see and touch. So they're more subtle, more difficult to work with. Whereas, bodies are easier to work with, more obvious. So anyway, so let's use our body as an example to illustrate these 4 misconceptions. So they involve believing that first misconception is impermanent things are permanent. So with regard to our body, we tend to think of it as permanent. And you might object, you might think, no, I know my body is impermanent. I know it changes. I know it's going to get old and one day it's going to die. So kind of on the intellectual level, we understand, or, we think we understand anyway, that it's permanent. But then if we check how we feel when changes do happen to our body, right? We see new wrinkles, new gray hairs, or our eyesight is decreasing, our hearing is decreasing. Yeah, so these changes that, especially the unwanted changes, things we don't want to happen to our body. So when those changes happen, do we accept them easily, without any emotional unhappiness? Or do we feel unhappy? Do we feel upset? Do we feel, oh, I don't want this to be happening. Why does this have to happen? Okay, so if we do notice some unhappiness, some resistance, some non-acceptance of changes happening in our body, then that shows that we don't really accept impermanence. We don't really see our body as impermanent, but we tend to see it as permanent, unchanging. And so having this particular misconception can lead to problems. Like I said, when changes do happen, we can feel unhappy. Some people can get, incredibly unhappy, incredibly depressed when it comes to changes that happen to their own bodies or changes that happen to others. Yeah, their loved ones, their friends, their pets, and so on. When they get old, they get sick, they're going through big changes, especially as approaching death. people can get incredibly upset, incredibly depressed. So, yeah. So it can lead to problems here and now in this very lifetime. But it's also something that keeps us stuck in samsara. Yeah, as long as we don't acknowledge and don't accept, don't realize the truth of impermanence, then the way we think, the way we act, and so on, we continue to create the causes to remain in samsara. And then number 2 is unsatisfying things are satisfying or pleasurable. And so this term unsatisfying is another way of translating dukkha. It's a more accurate translation for dukkha. And it includes the 3 types of suffering, which are explained in the Lamrim. You've probably heard these before. The first of the 3 is coarse suffering, which includes any kind of obvious unpleasant experience that we have, like pain, sickness, loss, grief, any kind of physical or mental experience we have that's unpleasant. And we nobody has to tell us this is suffering. We know it's suffering. Okay, so that's sometimes called the suffering of suffering. And then the second of the 3 types of suffering is the suffering of change. And that refers to experiences that seem to be pleasant, enjoyable, but because they don't last, they last a few seconds, a few minutes, a little longer, but eventually they disappear. And so they don't fully satisfy us. They don't remove our suffering. And after the pleasure goes away, we're back where we were before. Unhappy, bored, restless, craving, and so on. So that's the second type of suffering. And the third type of suffering is called pervasive suffering, which refers to just this situation where we have a body and a mind that are not free of karma and delusions, but we are kind of bound up with, tied up with karma and delusions. Our whole body and mind, our life comes into existence because of karma and delusions. While we live, while we're alive, our whole being is affected by karma and delusions. We're never completely free of those. And then because of the karma and delusions we have and are creating, then in the future as well, we're creating the causes for more suffering, more problems in the future. So as long as we're in samsara, subject to death and rebirth again and again and again, we're never completely free of karma and delusions. And that is the meaning of pervasive suffering. It sort of pervades the whole of samsara, all the beings, all the experiences of samsara. But that's more difficult to understand. So anyway, the 3 kinds of suffering is what's referred to by unsatisfying things or unsatisfying experiences. So unsatisfying things includes, again, our bodies, our minds, food, clothes, our possessions, our enjoyments, things like music and movies, things in the environment. Many people love nature. They love going into the mountains and into the forests and down to the sea and so on. But those places and those things are also unsatisfying, not fully satisfying, because they are all under the control of karma and afflictions. So when we hear this, we hear that our bodies and minds and everything in our lives are unsatisfying. They're dukkha. We may not feel very happy. We may feel some resistance. We may think, oh, Buddha is trying to take away my enjoyment, my happiness. But it's good to check for ourselves. Yeah. Are these things really satisfying? Are these things really the source of, long-term happiness and satisfaction? So just to share an example from my own life, I love chocolate. I know many people love chocolate. It's a pretty common object of pleasure and attachment. And so the other day it was Losar, which was also Chinese New Year last Saturday. So some benefactors, some friends of the Abbey offered us a really nice lunch. And that included in that was this box of chocolates. I think Godiva chocolates, really, really beautiful, wonderful. And so that was out there on the, the dessert table. And as I walked by, I took one piece and, left it there. I didn't eat it right away. And I noticed a couple of other people in the dining room had taken 2 pieces or 3 pieces, but I stuck with just my 1 piece. And when I went back later, they were all gone, so I couldn't take a second piece anyway. But when I finally got around to eating the piece of chocolate that I had, it was really delicious. It was really, wow, kind of this blast of bliss. And then I could see my mind wanting another one. I want that again. I want that blissful experience again, but there wasn't another one for me to eat. But even if you did, if you were in the situation where you had a whole box of chocolate to yourself and you could eat a second one and then a third one, you could eat a whole box if you wanted to. But, does that really satisfy? I was thinking about this, like, okay, that first piece of chocolate, made me feel good. There was this pleasure, but it only lasted a few seconds and then it's gone and it's over. And then what happens is there's craving. I want another one. Okay, I want another piece because that makes me feel so good. But, if the first piece of chocolate didn't satisfy you, how is the second piece of chocolate going to satisfy you? And likewise, the third piece of chocolate. And, you keep eating pieces of chocolate, but they don't really satisfy you. They only give you this very short-term pleasant feeling, but then that's it. And then it's over. And if you keep eating more and more and more, it turns into suffering. Then you have nausea, too much sugar. That's not pleasant at all. That's suffering. So that's just one example, but you can use your own life experiences to check what really happens with something that seems to be pleasant, seems to be satisfying. Check carefully. Does that really satisfy you? Does that really give you pleasure? Yeah, maybe a few moments, a few minutes, a few hours at the most, but eventually it leaves. That pleasant experience leaves you. And then what happens is craving arises, grasping, craving. I want more. I want it again. So this is something we need to check. We need to investigate for ourselves. But yeah, according to Buddha, we have this misconception that thinks that things that actually aren't satisfying, are pleasurable. And that's why we grasp at them. That's why we crave for them. And that's one of the main things that keeps us stuck in samsara. Creating the causes to take rebirth and have samsaric experiences again and again and again. One of the main causes is this kind of attachment, this kind of craving. And it's all because of it's because of misconception, not seeing the reality of these things that we are attached to. They're actually unsatisfying. and we see them wrongly. We see them as satisfying and pleasurable. So this is something to check. Okay, then the third misconception is that unattractive things are attractive. And so again, with regard to our body, generally people think of bodies as wonderful and fantastic and, beautiful, handsome, attractive, and so on and so forth. But if we look carefully at what a body is composed of, what it's made of, and, ask ourselves, those substances, those body parts, are they really beautiful and pure and attractive as we tend to think they are? So if we do that carefully and honestly, then hopefully we will recognize that, it's not really attractive. And the fourth is that things that lack a self have a self. Or another way of saying it, things that are selfless have a self. And the term self, this is a little bit complex. There are different misconceptions of a self, and at the time of the Buddha, there were people in India, certain religious teachers and their followers, who had notions of self, like Atman. They use the word Atman. And there were some who believed in the first type of self mentioned here, a permanent, unitary, independent self. So that means a self that's something unchanging, permanent, always the same, unchanging. And then unitary, meaning it doesn't have parts. It's like one whole monolithic thing that can't be divided into parts. And then independent means it doesn't depend on causes and conditions. It's independent of causes and conditions. So there were, and there probably still are today, people in India who believe in this kind of a self or a soul, something permanent, unitary, and independent. And we may have this notion as well, especially if we were raised in some religion, or I don't know, some school of philosophy. It's possible if you studied yoga and you didn't just, do the physical hatha yoga, but you actually studied the philosophy behind yoga, you may have been exposed to this kind of notion and bought into it, believed in it. So what the Buddha discovered is that kind of self doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a permanent, unitary, and independent self. But we have to check this for ourselves and see if that's true. And then the second one is called a self-supporting, substantially existent self. This is a type of self that's more subtle, and it's actually something everyone has innately. We're born with this conception of a self. And the way it appears most easily in our experience is when we have a sense of an I inside of us that's like the ruler, a boss, a leader, a king, a CEO, any of those terms, but something inside of us that's in charge, running the show, making decisions, controlling our body and mind. Okay. So, it's not always so obvious, but if we check carefully our experiences, we can become aware of this. This sense, this feeling that somewhere inside of me is this I that makes decisions, that is, running my life, and so on and so forth, controlling my body, controlling my mind, controlling everything. Although it doesn't do a very good job of controlling, but it tries. But anyway, this is a notion that we have. And this is what's called the self-supporting, substantially existent self, because it seems to be able to exist on its own. It's kind of, a little bit like the boss in charge of our body and mind. It's a little bit separate. And so again, everyone has that kind of conception. We're all born with it. But is it true? Does it really exist? Is there such a self? So what the Buddha says is no, that kind of self doesn't exist. So our being, our body and mind, our aggregates are actually empty of that kind of self. They lack that kind of self. So this is more difficult to understand than, say, impermanence or unsatisfactory things being satisfying, but it's still very important because it's believing in a false self, a self that doesn't actually exist, that is our main problem. It keeps us in samsara. Okay. So there are these 4 misconceptions that we need to overcome, to be free of our suffering and our existence in samsara. And so by meditating on the 4 general characteristics of that were in the previous slide, the 4 general characteristics of our body and so on, impermanence, and can we go back to the previous slide to see how they were written there? Impermanence. The previous one.
No, I know. I'm sorry. I'm just having trouble getting there. Sorry. Only wants to go one way. I don't know why.
It's okay. I have it in my slide.
Actually, let me just take it down and bring it back up.
Okay.
And then I'll do it.
So it's impermanence and then unsatisfactoriness. Impermanence, suffering. Okay, so in the previous slide, I used the word suffering rather than dukkha or unsatisfactoriness, but it's the same thing. So by meditating on the general characteristics, impermanence, suffering, empty and selfless, by meditating on those, we'll be able to overcome these misconceptions. Okay, so don't worry about finding that previous slide. Oh, there it is. Okay. Impermanence.
I finally did. Sorry.
Okay. So meditating on those will enable us to overcome misconceptions. So now you can go on to the next slide, that awful looking picture. I hope this doesn't gross you out. But just in case anyone is still not convinced about the body, these are pictures of skin, okay, human skin. The one on the top is the skin on the forehead magnified 500 times. Okay, so if you blew up a picture of the forehead 500 times, it would look like that. So it doesn't look so beautiful, I think. Looking at that picture. And then the one on the bottom, this one is really weird. This is a hair follicle on the skin. So the green thing is a hair, and it's been colored so that you can see it more clearly. So this is, we have lots of these pores on our skin with hair coming out. So if you look at them really, really carefully, blown up like that, that's what it looks like. So again, it's not exactly beautiful. And what's really awful here is the pink thing is a mite, a skin mite. And so studies suggest that we have these microscopic skin mites on our skin, including our face, and they live inside of our pores. And have you heard this before? It's really awful. They actually, when we're asleep, these little creatures come out and crawl around on our face, and I think they lay eggs in our pores. So probably most people don't know about this. And of course we don't see them because they're extremely tiny. But when you think about that, our face and other people's faces, this is what they look like close up. And so again, the point is not to go to an extreme and feel aversion and disgust, but the point is to just have a balanced view, overcome unrealistic notions, unrealistic conceptions, like the body's wonderful and beautiful and pure and perfect. So to overcome that and stop seeing the body that way, but we don't want to hate the body and feel disgusted by the body, because we're fortunate to have this body, this human body. So let's look at the next slide. This is words of the Buddha talking about these the 4 misconceptions and how beneficial it is to overcome them. So this is from a sutra in the Pali Canon, called Distortions of the Mind. So the Buddha says, perceiving permanence in the impermanent, perceiving pleasure in what is dukkha, perceiving a self in what is not self, and perceiving beauty in what is foul. Beings resort to wrong views, their minds deranged, their perception twisted. Such people are bound by the yoke of Mara. Mara is sort of the personification of delusions and suffering and problems and so on. All the things that prevent us from becoming enlightened and becoming liberated. So with these, Buddha is saying, with these misconceptions, we are bound by the yoke of Mara and do not reach security from bondage. Beings continue in samsara, going repeatedly from birth to death. But when the Buddhas arise in the world and send forth a brilliant light, they reveal this teaching that leads to the stilling of dukkha. Hearing it, wise people regain their sanity. They see the impermanent as impermanent, and what is dukkha as dukkha. They see what is not self as not self, and the unattractive as unattractive. By acquiring the right view, they overcome all dukkha. So, as always, the Buddha advised us to investigate for ourselves what he taught, not have blind faith, blind belief. And I mean, this is a lifetime work, there's a lot of material here to contemplate, to check against our own experience, so we can look at our own experiences in life, in the past, also in the present. We can observe the experiences of other people we know or people we hear about, and use our intelligence, our discriminating wisdom to investigate what the Buddha said and see if what he says is true, if it makes sense. And see if it's true that having these misconceptions, seeing things incorrectly, leads to suffering, leads to problems. And on the other hand, if we free ourselves from these misconceptions and see things more correctly, then that will free us from suffering. Okay, so we'll stop there tonight. There's one more slide, but I think we've done enough. I'll save it for a future class. There's a little bit of time left if there are any questions. So yeah, from next week, we'll start looking at the next of the 4 objects for the close placements of mindfulness, and that's feelings. It's very interesting and also very relevant. We tend to be very caught up in feelings, and if we're not careful, if we misunderstand feelings, don't know how to work with them, then that can also increase our suffering. Okay, any questions?
Min has his hand raised. Min, can you unmute?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is a great class. I think your example of the chocolate sort of remind me of a conversation I had with a Christian friend. And so I asked my friend who's Christian that what is their conception of heaven is. They say that, oh, heaven is where you can eat infinite chocolate, truffles, and you never get weight, and you never get sick of it.
This is the conception of heaven, or someone you were talking to?
The conception of heaven that of somebody that I was talking to. So they say that in the Christian version of heaven, it's like a place where you eat infinite chocolate and you don't get sick of it, and you don't get weight, and then you can drink infinite wines, and you don't get hangover as well.
So you can indulge all of your desires and not have any consequences to it. Yeah. Well, I mean, Buddhism has heaven as well. We don't usually use that term heaven, but they're usually called God realms or Deva realms, and there's actually many of those. And there's a variety of different experiences. So yeah, and some of them, the beings just indulge in all kinds of pleasant experiences, and they have very little suffering. But according to Buddhism, those places are not eternal. They're just other states of rebirth. So you're born there as a result of virtue, good karma, but eventually that runs out, and then your time runs out. And you have to leave that place and take birth somewhere else. Anyway, everyone has their own ideas about what is their goal, what they wish to achieve and attain, and so on. So I mean, people who do believe in heaven, as long as that motivates them to do good, to create virtue and help others, and so on, then that's good. They're living life in a good way, helping others, not harming them, and so on. And I was thinking too that people who do have some belief in an afterlife and a better place like heaven, that I think is probably more comforting than thinking we just die and go out of existence. There's nothing. We just live this life, we die, and that's it. There's no continuation. I don't know. For me, that notion is not at all comforting. Also with children, I was thinking when you're talking to children about death, because they always ask questions, you know, what happens what happened to grandma? Where did she go? And if you can say, well, she's gone to heaven. She's in heaven with God, you know, then that kind of, it's a nice answer to give to a child. But if you say, oh, she's gone, so, you know, nothing left. We don't talk about her anymore. She was a nice lady, but now she's gone. Everything's finished. You know, I think for a child, that's not as not as comforting as thinking that grandma went to heaven. So I don't know. Yeah.
Awesome. Actually, I have another conversation with another Buddhist friend who is from Thailand, and she said that when she was very small, she has a dream of being in somewhere. It's like a heaven, you know. It's whatever she wants, sort of manifests from space, you know. Whatever she wants manifests from space. But then after a while, suddenly her mind started to have this thought that this is suffering, this is attachment, this is pain, and then she wanted to escape from that place. And then a Buddhist monk appeared and guided her to an ocean. And then I don't know. I think she woke up from the dream.
Yeah, so in Buddhism, what we strive to do is free ourselves from attachment, desire, craving, and aversion, all the different delusions that run around in our mind and cause our mind to be unpeaceful and unhappy and so on. So that's the real goal. That's the real heaven, although we call it nirvana rather than heaven. But yeah. So I think we better end here because we still have to do some dedication prayers. So thanks so much for joining. Thanks, Effie, for hosting. And let's dedicate all the good energy we've created, share it with all living beings.
May the world be happy, the years good, and grains increase, the Dharma flourish, every happiness and bliss arise, and every wish in the mind be fulfilled. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Long life prayer of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in the world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And this is His Holiness the Dalai Lama's prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratakaya Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, together with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Munis' precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the three ways of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Especially thank you so much, Venerable Sangye Khadro. It was a wonderful class.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very